start talking about the Hollow Earth. We'll continue talking about it. It's certainly a topic that is interesting. I'm like insane, so I'm not going to talk about that. All right, and I just lost me. Sorry. No, having said that, there's been some very interesting developments over this past week, and I have to say, Mr. Trump has really outdone himself. I'm thinking more and more that he's actually going to solve the North Korea issue, which of course means it's possible he's going to solve the Middle Eastern crisis as well. I always thought it would take an outsider to actually get it done, and he certainly is that. But yeah, it's insane to actually watch what's happening. We're talking about peace talks between South and North. We're talking about the cessation of the nuclear program for North Korea, and all within his first term. If not his first year. So certainly quite the feat. And I still haven't got my mouse back. I do apologize. This is crazy stuff. I don't know why. It's got a new battery in it. I do apologize. Here we go. Okay. Connected, it tells me. But it isn't moving. Here we go. Connection lost, connection on. The only thing that worries me, and I shared that with you guys last week as well, is when I was in the States, which was about just over a week ago. In fact, I came back last Sunday. Is the fact that there was some local news around Yellowstone, but Dave informed me that he had heard nothing at all. There we go. On the local front or on the international front here in Australia. So I assume the other international news didn't carry anything else. So there was a lot of activity in Yellowstone. And like I said, oddly enough, not a lot happening around the international news front. So is something happening in Yellowstone? Well, if it is, then it could be a big problem. In as much as there is quite a bit of readjustment to be done if Yellowstone does blow. We're talking about an event that will change the face of the earth. It will change the face of civilization. It will change everything. Is it possible that the activities we've seen governments undertake, the hoarding of body bags and things like that? Here we go. Yeah. Oh, thank you, Solaris. You're right. And she's just agreeing with me on Skype that Yellowstone is a concern. I hope you're not toast. I really do, Solaris. But it is definitely a concerning thing. So essentially, maybe all the secret activities we've seen recently. Again, the body bags, the conversion of large shopping areas, such as Bunnings and Costco's and the like. In the States, I think we talked about it. There was actually another one that had worked with the government and it's now closing down, but clearly being used for something else. And I can't remember the name. It was a Walmart. Maybe it was Walmart. But the point is here that maybe that is part of the government activity to, I guess, prepare for that activity. Okay, Dave just pings me. He has gone through a Microsoft update, and he's just about to join me. So I guess I hope I can add you, Mr. Danger. Let me see. But yeah, so it is a concerning thing, because if it were to happen, then like I said, the world would look a very different place. And the only thing, the nuclear winter. I mean, that's a thing that's going to happen. The nuclear winter, if Yellowstone blows, it's the displacement of people. It's the massive potential chain reaction that could be triggered by the eruption of Yellowstone around the Rim of Fire. We've seen a lot of activity there as well. Is it related to Yellowstone? I don't know. David, are you with me?
I'm with you, my friend.
Great. I can hear some rummaging here in the background. Yes, look, I was just talking about Yellowstone and the potential ramifications it could have globally, obviously for everybody. And Solaris was just pinging me, and I do hope that she would be okay. But she might be physically located fairly close. In fact, I know she is fairly close to Yellowstone, and therefore she would be affected, obviously, by an eruption. But what is concerning, of course, is the fact that once Yellowstone is triggered, could we see a potential a domino effect as far as the Ring of Fire in the Pacific is concerned? I mean, there is more activity now. I mean, look at Hawaii, right? I think you sent me something like 1,500 eruptions or earthquakes, I should say. It was in a matter of days, a week, something like that. I mean, that's just insanity if you think about it. So that's really the question. I mean, is there something like that on the cards? And the question I asked our audience and ourselves is it that activity which I guess has made the governments of the world act in certain strange and odd ways, such as, the hoarding of food, the production of body bags, the conversion of shopping centers into holding, or even maybe
the Walmarts around the world. Yeah,
it was the Walmarts.
Yeah.
Okay. So, So into incarceration facilities potentially. So it could be, right? I mean, it would certainly make sense that if an event like that were predicted, or at least foreseen, right? Scientifically speaking, I'm not talking about prophecy here. I'm talking about scientifically measurable things. Then the activities would make sense, which doesn't really help anyone. It's a huge concern, as far as I'm concerned, right? If that were the truth. So what should one do? What should one do, Dave, if in fact that were to happen? But before we go there, welcome aboard, because
Thank you.
Now, I've been going on about this because it just it sprang to mind. I hope you had a good week, my friend.
Yeah, I did. Loving life at the moment, and
good man.
Yeah. So a little plug out to Optus. Thank you very much. I won an install prize.
Oh, good for you. What's that? How does that work?
Well, I got on a virtual reality bicycle, and it was load resisted pedaling. Proportional to what you're seeing in the VR. So it was actually pretty interesting. With my, I have to say this very lightly, my triathlete background, but anyway, that goes, it's a long way back. And I got on a bike, and I'm really competitive, and I thought, no one's going to beat me. I'm good. And I finished in first place. I don't know how many people had already attempted to do it in this store, but it was run nationally. And within the store that I was at, I came first, and I won the first place prize. Now, I was only going for a Fitbit. That's all I wanted. There was 5 of those on offer, and then a larger cash prize above that, and I managed to win that, and yay! And when I received the call, I didn't even believe it was true. I have to tell you, because a lot of my friends my friends have been receiving calls from what appeared to be Optus telling them they'd won a prize, and that's awesome. But it turned out to be fraudulent, their ones. And when I received it, I was really seriously doubtful that it was real, and it turned out to be real. So woohoo, right? So love that.
Woohoo for you, my friend.
Yeah. But now back onto the serious matter, and thanks for asking, by the way. Yellowstone, I was watching it. I was watching the 10 most critical natural disasters, like it was the top 10, yeah. And this was on television, and it was really recent, and it was only like a sideline to another story they were running. And the science advisor they had on named Yellowstone as the top most critical, most serious, and most likely of the and most recent in his prediction of the next cataclysm.
Okay.
And he said, and his words were, "Any day now."
Yeah, that's not so
That's
good,
what he
right?
said. I couldn't say what, and I thought, oh, I didn't hear him right, so I've taken it back in time and played it again, and sure enough, he said, "Any day now."
Now the question then becomes, just
I don't know
how,
what that means, though.
yeah,
I mean,
well,
is it really? Yeah.
how significant, right? How big
Uh-huh.
will it be? That's the question. How massive an eruption, if there were one? I mean, even a minor one would still be catastrophic if it were something maybe even comparable to Krakatoa, which happened
Mhm.
fairly recently, geologically speaking, just over 100 years ago, or something like there was one that was massive also in Indonesia, but that was almost an ELE. That was that was a lot longer ago though. The Toba explosion,
Mhm.
or the Toba event. Yeah, no, look. Interestingly enough, and Solaris, I haven't actually mentioned her show yet. Awesome show that just precedes ours. She had Jason Jarrell on today talking about giants. Now I missed it. I wish I hadn't. But it's Mother's Day, like I said, and we had some activities here
Yeah.
with the mothers, as it were. It's a great segue for us because obviously we're talking about the Hollow Earth, and some of the Hollow Earth mysteries and secret lores is around the giants that are supposed to live in the earth, as it were.
Yeah.
Six fingers, 6 toes, and all that jazz. But before we go there, is there anything
Oh yeah.
that concerns you this week, my friend? Anything that goes, we got to mention this to our esteemed listenership here.
Yeah, we do. All right, so I want to bring something up, and that is, if you don't know and you haven't done any research, Israel is in conflict with Iran.
That's not new news.
No, it's not new, but they launched missiles, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things that I have to mention here is what appears to be a false flag, just so that Israel could strike Iran. That's in my opinion. And they mentioned, Israel mentioned to its own people, you better get into your bunkers. That's what it said. There's a news report.
Yeah,
and then there was a missile strike that didn't hit anything. It hit no houses, it caused no damage, no casualties, nothing. And then suddenly, it game on. Yeah. So that kind of thing, I have to say, is a little bit suspicious. It causes me to question it. Missile strike was only onto a hillside, residential area. It looked like someone was just test firing, maybe an RPG or something. Don't know which side. Don't know. I don't know. But anyway, that's good enough. Yeah, let's push all the buttons in front of us and just do a massive strike against Iran. That kind of situation isn't good. We see it a lot. Any provocation for war is a terrible thing, and let's hope that wasn't a false flag after all. Mackie, if you haven't seen the Tasmanian floods, crazy footage there of a wall of water just coming down a hotel corridor. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Sort of looked like Titanic, to be honest.
Yeah.
And the last thing, while these really small, they appear small, I've dug something up here, and I think this is worthy because we've mentioned this before. We've mentioned Port Arthur before, and since 1996 there hadn't been any other mass shootings, and it was touted as a tremendous success for the government as a gun buyback scheme. And I'm saying this because of our audience, Mecca. You know where I'm going with this.
Mm.
However, there was just 2 days ago, or thereabouts, there was a shooting in or near Margaret River in Western Australia. And it was labelled a mass shooting. But it was a mass shooting. I've looked at the definition, and it's 5 deceased, according to gunshot wounds, right?
Yeah.
So anything greater than 5 or above, and that's classified as mass shooting. Well, we hadn't had one since 1996. Now this was 5. This was 3 adults and 4 children, and one of those was the perpetrator. And of course, the five person doesn't include the perpetrator in the definition. So it would, if some person killed a bunch of people then shot themselves, it's got to be greater than or equal to 5, not including that person, to be classified. But one thing I found, Mecki, when I look back in time, I found as recent as the 24th of March this year, the gun laws were requested to be stopped in their watering down of gun laws. The opposition asked the Liberal government to stop watering down the gun laws in Tasmania. Now that raises a question. If nothing had happened in May and it went on and that news story disappeared and no one cared about it, then great, all right? Someone decided to water down some gun laws.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you make a call to water down gun laws and suddenly there's a mass shooting and, oh, we're not going to water down any laws. What are you talking about? Because they're still going ahead. Well, they were about to go ahead. And it doesn't matter which political party is doing what. So you get a call out for something. Oh, let's water down the gun laws. Sure. And now there's a reason not to. And I just wanted to call that out, that we can see what you're doing, by the way, you know, like terrible special effects in a sci-fi film where you can see the special effects guy's hand holding the model. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to call out. I'm trying to call that out on this one.
But interestingly, go on.
But you had asked me actually about Yellowstone and and you connected it to Hawaii. There's a lot of volcanism going on right now. I mean, extreme versions of it. My call still is maybe that Hawaii has moved so far away from the hotspot that it's going to make a brand new island and yet another one, or that the entire side of that Hawaii is going to slip because of the amount of earthquakes is just off the charts.
There's a lot. There's a lot. And now, what concerned me just on this as well, this actually is something fairly personal for you, if I recall correctly. So Duncan Rhodes, the editor and publisher of Nexus magazine here in Australia, and by the way, a magazine that can no longer be purchased in the US, at least I don't think it can, because I went to a number of airports as well as magazine shops in the US last week, well 2 weeks ago, and I couldn't find it. I couldn't even find Atlantis Rising. So magazines that deal with this kind of subject matter seem to be hard to come by in the States at the moment. I'm happy to be proven wrong there. But anyway, so the point is, it's just so you know who he is. The Nexus magazine is probably the premier alternative news magazine in Australia and New Zealand.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and a lot of good content. He also organizes a number of, each year I should say, he organizes an event called the Nexus Conference. So he's done this for decades now, right? I started reading Nexus magazine, I want to say, in the mid-90s. So he has been at this for quite some time. Now, he posted something sorry for the preamble, but you need to understand who he is. He posted something on Facebook, because we have connected on Facebook, believe it or not, around the Aboriginal prophecies of, I guess, time change or new time beginning or catastrophic events per se, I guess, to some extent. And he connected that to a lot of people having visions or dreams of a massive tidal wave slash tsunami hitting the east coast of Australia, and that seems to be an event that is that may be getting closer than we think. Now, so if you link that with the potential activity in Yellowstone, and B, the potential activity, volcanic specifically activity in Hawaii, and in fact around the Rim of Fire in the Pacific, that makes a lot of sense. Because the Yellowstone event, were it to happen, could certainly be called a time changer, or not necessarily an end time event, but certainly an event that would end our time, as we know. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to wipe out humanity by any means, but certainly it would end the civilization as we know it. If that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm not going to say here, but it certainly could do that. And this tsunami is meant to be massive in scope, taller than the highest buildings in Sydney, which is pretty tall. So that's something that is coming to a head as well. But if you connect all these things, and if you believe any of this, of course, only. It does paint a picture that is a little bit concerning. Now, how far away from the coast are you, where you are?
Me?
Yep. How far away from the coast?
I don't know. 15 k's directly, but it's
okay.
three levels of 200-meter high hills between myself. As a direct link to water, the creek below me does lead to the ocean,
right?
And it snakes away and winds its way. However, if it was a tsunami, there has to be a buildup of water and a wave behind it. If it was significant enough to be, 100 meters tall, I think I'm pretty well stuffed, right? However, if it was, say, 20 meters high, I'm going to survive that, not a problem at all. Infrastructure will not, though. Power generation will not.
Yeah, that's right.
Sewerage will not. Clean water will not. Electricity, no. So you have to, infrastructure, food, all of that is destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, especially where I live. You'll also see a significant, maybe bridges being wiped out, not by just the influx, but by the outflow, because it brings, like we've seen with in Japan, the Fukushima area, and was it not Kobe? Was it Kobe earthquake that did it? Well, the washout of all that debris, because water only weighs a kilo for a little thing you can hold in your hand, but you fill it with debris and mud, trees, logs, houses, all the things that it's destroyed, and it washes back out. That weighs so much more than the water did originally, and that will wipe out everything. That'll, grind it off at the dirt. So I have to say that would be catastrophic. If you can imagine, it would go inland, Mekki, if it was a significantly high one, say just 20 meters, it would reach the Blue Mountains.
Yeah.
Up all the waterways. Can imagine how devastating that would be.
Yeah, the question is, like you said, how high. Sorry, it was Fukushima.
That's right.
The nuclear meltdown, but it depends on again how high this thing would go. I mean, if it goes through, and it leaves out the higher areas, alone, because again the Sydney area is relatively hilly. Also, it's flat, but there are significant hills within it, and then no real mountains until you hit the Blue Mountains, which is probably about 100 kilometers or thereabouts from the sea.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not mountains. I think the highest peak is around 700 meters, something like that. But yeah, so I mean, if it's 100-meter wave, and if there's sufficient water pushing from behind, then you will see, but higher ground is of course always advisable. I mean, I'm actually just near, sort of halfway up the foothills, on the highest point between the Blue Mountains and the coastline in Sydney. I'm sort of halfway between the Blue Mountains, but I'm at the highest point. If you just draw a straight line, plus there's the biggest freshwater reservoir right behind me as well. So these are things you guys have to think about for yourselves. I mean, what's a safe place? And once you have survived, it's because the initial concern is survival, but then what comes after, right? What is the aftermath like? What will be there? How long will it take to rebuild, etc., etc., etc. So it's very it's an interesting scenario. Now just on that as well. Please do listen to Solaris' show as well. If you haven't, please go ahead and become a subscriber to the station, because you can. And you can even come into the chat room. I'm there now, believe it or not. And there's a few people there, which is fantastic. And we've got a few good comments here. Something around time changes every time they turn on. The Large Hadron Collider is obviously being talked about here. Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Oh, and this is going to Stardust Man. He asked a question about a ship with a cargo of fertilizers in Texas that blew up, every building in a half-mile radius. Did not hear about that. It's just when things are going well internationally that things go wrong geologically. I'm going to start talking about today's topic. And today's topic is the Hollow Earth. And we're going to start talking about Operation High Jump in a moment, which is the Nazi occult link there we're going to look at. And we spent quite a bit of time over the last few weeks talking about the Nazi occult links as well. And there's a lot more going on in history, hidden history, I want to call it, the occulted history. Occult just means hidden, right? That's all it means. There's a lot of stuff that goes on that we're just simply not aware of, right? And that's really the problem. The Nazi history is one of those things. And the reason, of course, is because the Nazis lost the war. Therefore, the history was written by whoever won it, which was the Allies in this particular case. I don't really think necessarily that they lost the war, considering Operation High Jump, which we're going to talk about in a second, and Operation Paperclip, I should say. But it was a continuation of the Third Reich into the United States and to a lesser extent into the Soviet Union. But if you want to talk about the establishment of the CIA, certainly medical sciences as well, the American rocket program, which then morphed into NASA to some extent, it was all driven by the Nazi engine. Oh, when I say Nazi engine, by German scientists that came, and officers, intelligence officers, and so forth, that came across after World War II. And that's why we like to shine a light into that particular little corner, because we just don't know enough. And that goes along with some odd things that you pick up here and there. Operation High Jump is one of those things, which was a very odd activity. We'll talk about it in a second. There's another thing. If you watch Hellboy, I don't know if any of you do watch Hellboy. It's an adaptation. Yeah, it's a fun few movies. I think it's a couple of movies there with Ron Perlman in the lead role. But it's an adaptation of a comic book, and it deals with this. I call it a demon, if you will, that is found by American soldiers, which had been held by Nazi scientists. And they are referring, in Hellboy, in the first movie, in the comics as well, they're referring to the occult wars, which ended in 1956 with the death of Hitler. It could be completely made up. It's fiction after all. But it certainly is interesting that people are plugging into this kind of thought that more is going on, right, than meets the eye. And I would completely agree that more goes on. In Indiana Jones, same thing. You see the Nazis pursuing the Ark of the Covenant. Other things as well. Is that far-fetched? No, it is not. Because they did. Hitler did own the Spear of Longinus, which is the Spear of Destiny, which allegedly is the spear that pierced the side of Jesus Christ at the cross. And so he owned that because he came into possession of it when he took the Habsburg regalia and made them his own. So the Nazis certainly were, especially the high-ranking National Socialists, Heinrich Himmler, oh my God, Himmler, definitely, Goering to a lesser extent, were obsessed with some of these occult things. And we've spent a lot of time talking about this over the last few weeks, if you recall, and certainly the shows are there for you to have a look at. But Dave, yeah, so our technical difficulties notwithstanding, were there any other items you wanted to share with our listenership as far as news are concerned?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Very good. And we had some really good comments in the chat room as well. One was around the Hadron Collider and potential time changes. I guess it's talking about the Mandela effect there as well, guys in the chat room. So we have covered the Mandela effect in a couple of shows. Do I think the Mandela effect is a thing? I do think the Mandela effect is a thing. Because I myself have experienced some odd things where it felt like I was jumping time tracks, if you will, or dimensional tracks. I know it sounds crazy. I get it. But it certainly is something that I have experienced myself. One of the most interesting things is the Berenstain and the Berenstain discussion, right? Was it Berenstain or was it Berenstain? Right now, I can tell you unequivocally, it's Berenstain, as in a spot, stain, not Steen. The Berenstain Bears, this children's book. We have it here, but I didn't grow up with it. In Germany, I didn't have that, so I can't be part of the discussion. I just don't know. But certainly, people have very strong opinions either way. There are other things as well.
But I'll tell you how I fall into this as well, Mackie, is that I remember the news report that Mandela died in prison.
Yeah, no, I do remember.
I remember that one, right?
Yeah. So I thought I did as well, but then again, maybe not. So the question is, in fact, truly, are we? And look, let's link it up to the Yellowstone thing just for a second. Just bear with me, just 1 second before we dive into today's show, because we finished with the news points. But okay, so let's say, for argument's sake, there is a Yellowstone eruption coming along. It's going to happen in the near future because geological sciences have predicted it. All the measurements. There's some good modeling happening, and we know it's going to happen. It's going to happen. I'm going to make up stuff here. Let's say it's going to happen 5 years into the future, right? And people find this out, I don't know, 5 years ago, 3 years ago, whenever it was. And at the same time, there are a lot of secret projects running, and maybe one of them, or maybe it was 50 years into the future that we predicted Yellowstone. Who knows? But the point is that what can we do? Well, there's not a lot we can do. We can build arcs, we can get into space, we can build underground facilities, and I think all of these things are happening. I really believe those things are happening, right? We know there's a secret space program, we know there's massive underground installations, right, and all kinds of things. But what if, at the same time, I had some kind of device, right, that could alter the timeline, that could alter future events? Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
So if I had that device, and maybe, just maybe, I'm not saying it is, but maybe it is a device whose physics are linked to the Nazi bell. Maybe. Right? So I know this is connecting quite a few things here, but it is not as far-fetched as it sounds, because we do know that the Nazi bell, while not physically available to us to examine, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence around its existence and what it could do, creating this failed distortion field. Some people, say it had the ability to alter dimensional structures, maybe allow interdimensional travel, potentially. If it does interdimensional travel, well, potentially time travel as well. Is the Large Hadron Collider a scaled model or an approximation, potentially, of the physics
around the bell? Yes.
Is it not? I honestly do not know, because I'm not that. Well, I have never seen the bell, and I only know we only know rudimentarily what the physics were around it. But certainly, if you've got a massive circle, as you do in the Large Hadron Collider, a particle accelerator, as it were, why could you not use that in torsion physics? You just add a few more tracks potentially to create the torsion fields. Just saying, right? So if you had that technology then, and you know that you built the space arcs, and you built the underground facilities to save as many people as you can, whatever, or just maybe your people, wouldn't you then, if you had the capability, wouldn't you choose to alter the future event if you could? Right? So is that the reason we have not had it yet? Is that the reason we have avoided a whole bunch of things? Now, I'll give you a few things to think about here. Do you remember the Tunguska event of 1908? So the Tunguska event of 1908, people still don't know what actually happened. Something massive blew up in the atmosphere, not too far off the ground, but in the atmosphere. It didn't hit the ground. And it flattened 100,000 acres of Siberian forest, killing tens of thousands of reindeer, potentially a few people that lived there as well. But it was a contained event. I mean, it wasn't as catastrophic as it could have been had it exploded over Moscow or.
That would have been absolutely devastating. But it felled trees with the power of and distance equatable to something like the Tsar bomber.
Yeah, completely.
On 1,000 square kilometers.
Yeah, if it had
felled trees all pointing away from the burst.
Correct. That's exactly right. Absent a crater, because there was no impact. Now, so if it had exploded over London, that would have been the end for the southern tip of England. But
imagine England running around looking for the perpetrator.
Yeah, that's right. But exactly. But it didn't happen, right? It did not happen that way. It happened the way it did. It happened in an area which, it kept, I guess, human or civilizational casualties at the lowest possible point. Now, is it possible then that events like this only are turning out as benign as they were? I mean, when I say benign, I mean, it's still
relatively benign.
Yeah. Not as devastating as it could have been, because we have this machine. Did we, in fact, win World War II because of that machine? So this is going to go really far. And I think we'll have to take it to the break, because this is actually opening up a whole new...
tinfoil hats on, people.
Oh, completely. It's opening up a whole new thought process here in my mind. So let's say we have this ability in this machine. Now, why wouldn't we then go back and alter the past? So let's say, for argument's sake, the United States never entered World War I or World War II or, in fact, the Vietnam conflict. Like, that's the timeline, right? It never happened. And then, we get this technology all of a sudden, and that's where the timelines get muddled, because obviously the futures is affecting the past, and that's when everything sort of gets really strange and non causal, right? So you're losing all causality here once you start messing about with the timelines. But wouldn't you then go back in time to create events that would necessitate the United States entering these things, like the sinking of the Lusitania, right? Like Pearl Harbor? Would you not create these events, or let them, allow them to happen, so that your country could enter World War I, World War II, and so forth, right? If you had that power, wouldn't you go back to alter events? The Germans were very, very close, if not having already completed work on a nuclear weapon. Okay, I mean, this whole thing we talked about in the last few weeks, Project Giant, in the Harz Mountains in Germany, the massive underground facilities. This was a project that had the highest criticality by the Nazi leadership. Massive amounts of concrete and other materials, including labor, were siphoned, or not siphoned off, rather diverted to this project. It was deemed kriegsentscheidend, which means essential for winning the war. Essential, decisive for the war effort. A decisive thing. And it's not just new rockets. That wouldn't have been decisive. But what if you could go back and change the I guess the hand, tip it in favor of the Allies? Right, and sabotage the Nazi nuclear experiments and so forth, right? Why not do that? Of course you would. So should we look at our history and the potential Mandela effect that we all seem to be experiencing? Can we attribute that to a deliberate meddling in our timelines, a deliberate undertaking to alter the course of history, Well, I don't know if it's for the better or the worse, to be honest with you, because I don't know what the other timelines look like. Okay, so I mean, horrific things are part and parcel of history, have always been. Okay, the Nazi atrocities in World War II are no different. They're no different to that theme. If you look at any period of history, it's full of horrific events, which lead to other things. I mean, Rome, the Roman Empire, probably the most horrific things happened in the Roman Empire. The slaves, numbering in the millions, and the lives they lived, the horrible lives they had, the cruelty, of the Roman Empire, both in its warfare and in its treatment of the slave population and then the defeated populations of the countries it conquered, is horrific. But can you alter that? Should you alter that? In fact, was it something else before? Did Hannibal beat Rome? Did he manage to raise it? And then what kind of history did that spark? And why did we change that? Or should we change it so Carthage is triumphant and we only know about Rome as the city that was raised by the Carthaginians 2,000 years ago?
Maggie,
so go on.
That's okay. I was just going to say, we've got a point here. And I think you're saying all the right things. But my point is, if you start meddling in time, like meddling in weather, which I know they're doing that for sure, you're going to have a kick-on effect, a knock-on effect. There's going to be things that you didn't expect, and you're going to have to be in a world of constant correction.
Well, yes, you would, wouldn't you?
Yeah, absolutely would, right?
Once you start messing, yeah.
Yeah. Now, this is highlighted in one particular Star Trek episode, and I just want to say something really quick about it. And this guy is trying to bring back his loved one, right, who was killed accidentally by a particular species of sentient being. So what he decided to do immediately upon, getting contact and getting his hands on a time ship was he destroyed that species' world. Okay, the whole world, everyone, billions of that species wiped out. His wife in the timeline was then killed by something else. All right, so all right, I'll stop that from happening. And he was stuck in a perpetual rethink about how he can now get his dead wife back to life again, because it kept happening. Mm-hmm. It was an event that he couldn't stop. And he changed things so that there was no life in the entire sector. And then it was attacked by the next neighboring sector, right? And it was just on and on and on and on. My point here is, Meki's right, this constant meddling that you'll have to do to try and get things back to the way you want them to be, or do you just settle with it? Like where we are now, just talking about the Mandela effect. Okay, we changed history and we've won the war and we've done all this stuff, except Mandela died, right? I'm sure that'll correct itself. And so they do some more things and suddenly he didn't die in prison. Mm-hmm. But our timelines were all changed slightly. Mm-hmm. And this is what maybe these waves of time differences are coming through because they're doing these changes.
That's right, and thank you for mentioning that. So let's just stay with Mandela just for a second here. As you make these changes, I mean, these changes are being made from a very subjective point of view. So whoever does these changes, their point of view is the right view in their mind, obviously, and they want to change the world to whatever they want to change it from their point of view. Now, but if you take that to its logical conclusion here, is South Africa or Southern Africa in general, not just South Africa, but Southern Africa, is it better now than it was? Well, look, the answer is for the Black African population. Mm-hmm. I would say maybe. I don't want to give it an unqualified yes, because the situation in Southern Africa is quite volatile. It is. Yes. There's a lot of violence.
So true.
And, it's again, and so let's just stay with me on that, and let's jump to the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union collapsed, was it a better world or worse? Now, for the longest time, it was much worse because the Russian mafia or the gangsters took over to some extent. There was a lot of corruption, and even now, Russia is struggling to some extent to get out of that quagmire it found itself in after the end of the Soviet Union. And when Yugoslavia collapsed, for example, right? Again, an event that might have been brought about from the outside, it led to the first European war in 30 years, in a horrific war in the Balkans, in fact. So back to South Africa. So I mean, if from a white South Africans or Southern African point of view, it's a much worse situation. You know, I know quite a few South Africans that have immigrated from Australia. Sorry, from South Africa to Australia, and there's some horror stories. Again, there always are. So we have to ask ourselves, who is it better for? So who's making these changes, and who is it better for? So whose vantage point is this being changed from?
And when do you settle with the outcome being reasonable?
But you can't.
No, I know.
That's the thing. There's a really great science fiction story which was made into a movie, and I can't remember who, but it's called the Distant Sound of Thunder. Distant Sound of Thunder. I don't know if you've seen it, but essentially it's about this time travel business that goes back into the I guess Jurassic, and has these expeditions I guess dinosaur times, and they have to stay on the track. Nothing can be changed, of course. Something is changed, and the changes are more and more catastrophic the more they try to fix it. A Sound of Thunder. It's called A Sound of Thunder. Okay, who's written it? Ray Bradbury, of course. It was a short story by Ray Bradbury, the one of the godfathers of science fiction, The Sound of Thunder. And so they make a change, and then they come back, and things are different, and they go back again and try to undo the change they had made, and on it goes, right? In the short story as well as the movie, and it's actually Ben Kingsley's in it, and Edward Burns, if you haven't seen it, A Sound of Thunder, released in 2005. I really like it. I mean, but then I like, there's the music. Don't go away, guys. We will talk about Operation High Jump. Donate, well, if you can, take the break to donate. It's easy, or even buy a subscription, $5 a month.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and FreedomSlips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, FreedomSlips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Hello and welcome back to Dave and Mackie Shandy's Head Out.
You don't know. You'll never know, Mackie. I was muted.
No, I was completely out. I didn't think you were at all. No. This is show number 323, I think.
322.
Or 322. 220 and 300, as I like to say. And we are going to talk about the Hollow Earth in just a second. So Dave, just to conclude what we spoke about prior to the station break. Are you with me? This is far. I mean, all of a sudden you can connect a few things. I mean, it's a tenuous connection. I understand. Obviously, we don't have any proof. Concrete proof, like a confession, as it were.
I own a time machine, Mackie. Right? I never told you,
Right?
Yeah.
Thanks, buddy. But certainly, I mean, if you are willing to suspend your disbelief, and you're willing to tread on ground that is completely outside your comfort zone, then these things make sense. And the Mandela effect, the potential, the technology that was in existence in Germany, prior to World War II as well as during, and the potential acquisition. So let's say, for argument's sake, the Nazis developed or found technology because they had gone to all kinds of places. So maybe this is ancient tech, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the Allies got it, right? And it's important who has it last, relatively speaking. If there's such a thing as an absolute time track, on that time track, it's important who has it last. Anything else before that is completely irrelevant because it can be erased.
True.
Right? So whoever holds it and manages to hold it is the winner. And that would explain the insane security around this potentially and the insane denial around any of this tech as well. Because again, if we're dealing with time travel, Dave, when do we want the time travel machine to be invented?
It's irrelevant.
Completely irrelevant. Because once you have one, there it is. And therefore, I postulate here, unequivocally, that time travel exists.
Mm-hmm.
If it is a possibility, and I think we have, even within, I guess, conservative physics, we have now seen that time travel is a serious possibility. Okay, you need a black hole for it, but still. Then it will be invented one day. Has been invented already. And therefore will be used, be it by accident, someone finds one, or deliberate design, whatever it might be. But once time travel exists, it cannot be gotten rid of. And I wouldn't be surprised if entire civilizations had been devoted to nullifying the destructive effects of time travel, right? It's interesting. In Star Trek, you get, yet again, I know we love our Star Trek comparisons here. There was this was for, I think they first came in The Next Generation.
Mm-hmm.
I think, but it might have been a later series. But I think it was Next Gen. Anyway, there was a time travel bureau. You remember the
yeah, that's right.
The Federation's
they would arrive because they were allotted to a breach in time protocols.
Yeah, so they have a timeline, which is the accepted timeline, whatever it is, right? And then if something would happen, and in fact, it was Janeway.
Janeway was always in trouble for time breaches.
She was, and Q certainly didn't help. But look, that's Star Trek. But in reality, if you had that, and this is actually interesting because movies like Time Cop and things like that come to mind as well. Even the Time Lords, Doctor Who, right? Which, the Guardians of the Timeline and so forth. It is all. I mean, we've thought about this as humans. We've thought about the consequences, and the fact of the matter is, it would have to be very tightly controlled, right? Unless whatever we do in the past has got zero effect on the future. We just create new.
Unlikely,
I agree. So, but what we're seeing now, to some extent, I think, and maybe not yet a catastrophic extent, and maybe we're being steered away from catastrophe, is a meddling with our timeline. I really think that's on the cards here. I know it sounds crazy. I get it, and it sounds crazy because nobody talks about it. So this is not something that you talk about in school. This is not something that is general. I guess. Newsworthy material that the mass media has. In fact, think about this. Now, some people will argue what we're seeing today, the consolidation of the media power into 6 organizations, is just a natural result of capitalism. And some people will argue, and I would say, okay, fair enough. It's okay. It's an argument to be made. However, is it not also possible that this was a deliberate effort to control the media and what people think and how they think? Is that not a more likely scenario? Especially, there used to be hundreds, if not thousands, of independent papers, radio stations, TV stations across America and across the world. And a lot of them, the vast majority of media today is owned by 6 corporations, right? And that's not just in the English or English-speaking Western world. Not at all. These corporations are cross-national. Sony is one of them, obviously, right?
Yeah.
So So because if you control the media, then you control what everybody thinks.
You're
what
controlling the message.
Yeah, you're controlling the message, and you're controlling what people think about, what is acceptable to think about. Noam Chomsky, a very great, in my opinion, linguist and thinker of our time, Noam Chomsky said, as long as you control the parameters, as long as you control the box, for want of a better term, people can talk about whatever they want.
That's right.
Within that box. You speak, knock yourself out, whatever you want. You step outside the box, different story. But if you control the box, it's completely irrelevant what people talk about. Do you know what I mean?
And
that's the kicker.
And that's talking, thinking, publishing, and creation. Those things inside the box doesn't matter. You start doing that outside the box, outside of the control, and good luck with that. What happens? You know, it used to be in the olden days that, you know, you would just have a car accident.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then there was like heart attacks, and, you know, then despite there being, you know, several bullet wounds to someone, they were still officially declared suicide. Yeah. So the message they don't want out there, I think, and this is a tough time for everyone, and I've mentioned this before, Mekki, that Wikipedia and Google have gotten together to prevent the issuance of what was considered conspiracy theories. Anything that's conspiracy theory on Wikipedia in their accepted list, but which they accept that no one else accepts, like JFK is even listed. What?
Yeah.
Right? How can JFK be solved? Is it solved? No. It's a magic bullet, right? And all that. Yeah, so, but that's still listed there. It's still listed. You know, despite there being original film footage of the 3 astronauts that were supposed to be going to the moon in low Earth orbit, who never actually got out of low Earth orbit, despite that footage being in existence, and that was the only time those 3 fellows went into space in a rocket, still, the first moon landing by humans on the moon is still questionable. But, Mekki, you can't go and change that conspiracy list because, you know, lockstep and all, right? And if you were to mention stuff like that, you get demonetized, and eventually your channel is taken down on YouTube. How is that even a thing? This is that control in the box thing.
Yeah.
It really is. And it's difficult, I have to tell you, that it's difficult. That, you know, in the olden days, they just, you know, brandish you with, you know, they're crazy and tattoo you on your forehead or brand you with one. Poor Operation High Jump Admiral Byrd, I'm trying to get a segue in, he went into a mental institution immediately upon his return after doing a number of media, press, television interviews and radio. And then he was whisked away, never to be seen again, and then ended up dying a year later. What? Hang on. Was he telling us something? Did he succumb to the, you know, was he outside of the box? Did he succumb to the pressure of having to say the right thing and be the right person according to the government's message? Because that's the government now and advertising are all controlling the message. And that's very important to remember when you're listening to it. Remember, it is a message. Remember, that is what Mekki said. And I'm going to throw it back to you, Mekki. That is, you're allowed to say whatever you want as long as you're inside the box.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, there's something very interesting that Nighthawk, in fact, mentioned on Revolution.radio, and this is around the actress Alison Mack. Again, this is to the point around media. I actually hadn't heard about it until I read it on Hawk's webpage. But there's this really strange, the NXIVM group, and it seems to have some kind of sex cult or some kind of sex trafficking. It's just very strange that all went on, and that seems to be now implicate some billionaires as well. And that news is, I mean, the last news, the official news is from April 21st. This is the ABC reported on this, but there's no story after that except for some independent blogs, but nothing else, which is interesting. Again, you can suppress any news that you want. It's easy enough to do if there's only 6 people owning it, right?
That's right.
But so I mean, that's food for thought. I hope our listenership is not too bored by this, because it's certainly very interesting, and I do believe it's important to understand where it's all heading and that it's all connected. Yeah, I will. I think my chair might be creaking a little, not this way, but maybe this way, right?
That way, definitely.
Yeah, that's left to right. This is up and down. So, but today's show, I want to get as far as we can, and maybe we can't finish it. But we are talking about the Hollow Earth. It's show number 11. So we did it quite some time ago, and it's been a little bit of an update. A few things we've updated, and it's 310 shows ago, I guess. I mean, this is 6.5 years ago that we did this show.
Wow!
I know, exactly right. So today we're gonna start talking about Operation High Jump. Go ahead.
I didn't say anything, Mackie. It's okay.
Oh, wow.
It's just, NSA.
Yeah, the NSA is mit dabei, is with us. It's German.
Hey, fellas.
So Operation High Jump, and we're going to talk about the Nazi occult link here in Operation High Jump. Just very quickly, last week we talked about Admiral Byrd, the missions that he was part of that went into the Arctic as well as the Antarctic, and mostly the Antarctic. And, we discussed the varying hollow Earth theories in mythology. Almost every culture is talking about some kind of underground kingdom, let's call it, or realm that some people even believe they came from it. Stardust Man. Well, I'll look into the black goo for you. We can do that. Why not? This is the Shiny Starlight. We take listener requests, and that's one of the first. Stardust Man, thank you. So I will look into the black goo. But Dave, tell us about the occult link of Operation High Jump, please.
This particular mission fueled conspiracies regarding government operations in the Arctic and the nature of their goals. High Jump was one of the largest operations ever conducted in Antarctica, with over 4,000 men sent to study, map, and reside on the continent for up to 8 months. The expedition included 13 Navy support ships, including an aircraft carrier, helicopters, flying boats, and an array of more traditional aircraft. This expedition, as well as the subsequent Operation Deep Freeze, 8 years established an American military presence in Antarctica, which is prohibited today. Why exactly was there such a rush to facilitate this occupation, I wonder? That's important to question. Byrd later told a reporter for the Chilean newspaper El Mercurio that his expedition taught him the US should prepare for the possibility of hostile planes coming from the polar regions as part of the recapitulation of his own polar experience. Many took this to be evidence of the flying craft he saw coming from what is thought to have been the city of Agartha. Nazi knowledge of Agartha. Other speculation regarding Byrd's supposed search for Agartha notes a Nazi presence in Arctic territory, both north and south. It is well documented that the Nazis explored Arctic regions, set up bases, and test novel weaponry. But it is also well documented that Hitler and the Nazis were obsessed with esotericism and the occult, which we covered in a previous cycle. The rabbit hole goes deep here, with some going so far as to posit that Hitler could have escaped to this underground world, though that might be counterintuitive if the ancient enlightened society resided down there. Maps believed to be Nazi instructions on how to reach Agartha are supposedly corroborated by a letter from a German U-boat navigator. A letter from Karl Unger, no relation to me, by the way, claims U-209, which is U-boat number 209, made it to Agartha and the Earth is in fact hollow. The letter also mentions the notorious German Generals. German generals Karl Haushofer and Rudolf Hess, who he says were right about their hollow Earth theory. Mekki.
There's ample evidence the Nazis spent a lot of resources searching for Agartha as a last resort for Hitler to escape to in case of dire emergency, somewhat warranting these conspiracies. In fact, the most common diagram of Agartha was drawn by German scientists in 1935. We've got the map here included in the show notes. Evidence also exists to indicate the Nazis may have believed we already lived on the inside of the Earth. Some experiments of the Third Reich sure believe the Earth is concave and we reside on the inside or the interior of a sphere. In a bizarre experiment conducted in 1942 by Nazi scientist Heinz Fischer on the island of Rügen, his team attempted to observe a British fleet by pointing the lenses of the infrared equipment up at a 45-degree angle. They believed that though the Earth was concave, normal rays were refracted off of the ocean, but infrarays would not. Of course, they only saw the sky, but this shows that they believed and searched for evidence of alternative Earth theories. Now, just because someone has a theory and then tests it doesn't mean that's the truth. But again, this indicates how serious they were about finding evidence of I guess, strangeness or anomalies, right? Mm-hmm. So they invested. And I guess, look, maybe that's a good thing that the Nazis were so obsessed with this and actually fairly open-minded when it came to things like that, when it came to the occult. Not in the tolerance of other occult groups, because they were all, vilified and then forbidden, right? They were made illegal, and some of them ended up in concentration camps. But certainly, when it came to believing in the occult and being able or willing to invest money in its exploration. So that's that. Now, let's talk for a second about planetary formations and why we're doing this. Well, I mean, what kind of currency do we have here as far as the Hollow Earth is concerned? And what we have is Edmund Halley. Okay, I'm going to talk about the hollow planet history with you guys for a second. And that might explain why the Nazis were so interested in it as well, because the Nazis didn't invent the Hollow Earth theories, okay? Sir Edmund Halley, I should say, who discovered Halley's Comet. He lived from 1656 to 1742, so predating Nazis by roughly 200 years. And now Halley's most controversial theory originated from his study of magnetism. Halley realized that the magnetic poles were constantly moving. Right? We know that. That's a fact. He believed this could be explained by having two fixed magnetic poles, north and south, in the crust of a hollow Earth, and two more inside which were moving. He envisaged hollow spheres, one inside the other, rotating at slightly different speeds. One of these inner shells would contain the other set of magnetic poles. If that shell rotated slightly slower than the outermost shell, then that might account for the apparent motion of two of the magnetic poles while the other two stood still. Now, you have to understand that nobody at the time had anything like ground-penetrating radar, that there were no deep holes that people could, bore. So these are all speculations by scientists, right? These are all just theories. I'm not saying that's what it is. I'm just telling you the thought process of these people. Halley speculated on whether there might be life inside these shells. Since God, in his opinion, had created animate beings which inhabited every part of the Earth as we know it, why should he not therefore have also caused the interior of these shells to be habited? He suggested, Halley that is, that the atmosphere might be luminous, or the inner sides of the spheres might emit light, or there might even be small suns inside the Earth, which he referred to as peculiar luminaries below, of which We have no sort of idea. So he's just saying he's got no clue what's going on, right? Many of the core features of the Hollow Earth theory were born out of Halley's speculations. Now, essentially what we're describing here is a Dyson sphere, or even multiple Dyson spheres within each other, right? And we've discussed Dyson spheres with you guys at length. Essentially what it is, it's a shell that is built around any solar object, any sun, out of the material that is available in that particular solar system. So it's just a shell. And the reason that's being done, I think it's a stage 3 or stage 4 civilization that does it, is to absorb all of the sun's energy. Because right now we get a tiny, minuscule fraction of the sun's energy. Minuscule. Right? Just imagine how much more we could accomplish if we can capture all of the sun's energy. Right? And of course, the way to do that is to encapsulate it with a shell. And that's a Dyson sphere. Anyway, could there be any logical reason for thinking that a planet might be hollow? The only possibility which comes to mind is that a spinning sphere might become hollow naturally. The argument is as follows. Again, not saying that's what it is, just bear with me. Scientists believe stars and planets formed from huge clouds of dust in space. Gravity caused them to condense. Then they started spinning and eventually became spheres. If this is the case, then, like an ice skater, these stars and planets would have spun ever faster as they contracted. Right? That's the centrifugal force. This would be dictated by the law of conservation of angular momentum. However, the solar system tells a different story. It is not the smallest planets which spin the fastest, but the largest ones. The Earth rotates on 24 hours. So that's when we rotate around ourselves. And many of the planets smaller than the Earth rotate even slower than that. Jupiter, the largest planet, which has a diameter more than 10 times that of the Earth, spins about its axis in a mere 10 hours. This is not what one would expect from condensed solar planets. John pointed out, and this is another contributor to this article, that this is also true of the different types of stars. The larger ones spin faster than the smaller ones. He believes that it can be shown mathematically that a high rate of rotation would cause a spherical body to expand until it reaches a point of maximum inertial stability. And I'm quoting here. This smaller size, slow rotation, bigger size, faster rotation relationships of planets and stars rotations is exactly what you would think if the planets and stars were created hollow, however. Right? So again, this smaller size, slow rotation, and bigger size, faster rotation relationship of planets and stars rotations is exactly what you would think if the planets and stars were created hollow. Because according to spherical shell dynamic theory, the planets and stars were created out of convection currents between warm and cool regions of space, swirling the particles into whirling, twirling tornadoes of particles. In the zero gravity of space, these tornadoes took on the shape of spheres with open poles, and the faster they were rotating, the larger they became. All mathematical exercises show that if one could suspend an object at the center of the Earth, then it would be weightless. So, when a forming planet rotates, the matter at its core will be flung away from the center. Again, centrifugal force. Gravity, however, increases as one moves away from the center of a planet because there's more matter below it. So a point is reached whereupon gravity is stronger than the centrifugal force and the expansion then stops. One thus ends up with a hollow, spinning sphere. Makes actually sense from a physics point of view. What about the hollow moon, Dave?
Well, completely. I'm with you on that, 100%. Having two bodies gravitationally locked, where one of them doesn't rotate on its own without the rotation constantly being focused on its partner, is the moon. But think about this. NASA is so curious about the hollow moon itself that they sent 2 satellites up, one to follow closely behind the other, and they're called Ebb and Flow. And the head of NASA says, when asked what those were for, he says to find out whether there is anything below the surface. Sorry, we want to know what's below the surface, if anything. So NASA is, in his wording, I suppose, guilty of postulating the same thing, that the moon is indeed hollow. that maybe it's a construct. Maybe it didn't suffer from a creationism rotation issue that brought all the matter to the exterior, but rather that it was artificial. And it must have been artificial. Sorry, it must have been introduced at some point in the past because humans had a time before the moon. That must also be considered. Mackie?
Yeah, absolutely. So the hollow moon then. The idea of hollow planets seems to have found a home for itself among Russian scientists more than anybody else. In the last century, the 20th century, the Russians have twice suggested that planetary bodies might be hollow. The first was the suggestion that one of the moons of Mars was hollow. I think it was Phobos, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, the second was when two senior scientists from the Soviet Academy of Sciences, as it was then known, clearly not Soviet anymore, suggested that our moon was hollow, our moon. In the mid-1970s, Vasin and Sherbakov from the Soviet Academy of Sciences suggested that the moon was a huge alien spaceship. They actually suggested that. That's a real thing.
It's a thing,
not a made-up thing. No one really knows how the moon came into being, and we've done shows on the moon. I do urge you to look at it. There's some things you're going to mention, but I might mention some more. If the moon and Earth formed together in orbit, why are the surface materials of these two worlds so dissimilar? There are also some rocks found on the moon which might be older than the Earth. And we're talking to the tune of billions, or a billion years, I think. Perhaps the moon came from elsewhere, perhaps even from outside our solar system. Many scientists have suggested that, but here Newtonian gravity becomes a problem. According to all calculations and models produced by scientists, the chances of a successful capture of the moon by the Earth, as a mere random event, is 1 in 1 billion, or 1 in billions. It's actually, you've got a better chance of being struck by lightning on the day you win the lotto. That's
bugger. That's actual irony.
Right, I know, right?
Yeah.
How could the Earth have captured the moon against such odds? Well, this is where it gets interesting. This is why these two Russian scientists suggest the moon was steered into orbit by intelligent beings, who perhaps are no longer around. Or perhaps they still live there inside the moon. Why a hollow moon then? Apollo 12 placed the first seismometer on an alien world. NASA did not expect many moonquakes. They expected the moon to be seismically dead. So there's no activity on the moon, they thought, right? To ensure some kind of seismic result, they deliberately caused part of a rocket to crash into the moon. So again, let me recap. NASA puts a seismometer, which is something that measures tectonic activity or seismic activity on any given body, in this case, the moon. So Apollo 12 put it there. And because NASA did not expect the moon to have shifting plates or whatever, well, they decided to create their own seismic event. And they crashed part of a rocket into the moon, deliberately. When they did this, the results astounded all the theoreticians. The moon's behavior was quite unexpected. And this is Dave's favorite
I
quote.
love this. Can I say it?
Please.
It rang like a bell for almost an hour.
That's right. Scientists were quite stunned at the time. It may interest the esteemed listener to know that in 1959, a prominent Russian astronomer produced spectrographs showing what he believed was a volcanic eruption, which he detected on the moon. There's indeed more activity on the moon than we used to think. The moon is definitely not as geologically dead as many think. We know now that moonquakes occur with clockwork regularity. Now, just on the moon for a second. We did, 6 shows on the moon, I want to say. And, some tribes call themselves the tribes before the moon arrived. They refer to a time before there was a moon. The moon itself is a very anomalous object. It is 400 times smaller than the sun, but 400 times closer to the Earth, which means there is a perfect solar eclipse possible by the moon moving across the sun. And it's only possible because of these dimensions. Okay, if the moon was bigger or smaller, that would not be possible. But we get a perfect solar eclipse. The odds of that are worse than being struck by lightning on the day that you win lotto. Okay.
You know, the only thing that could bring the moon in and be captured would be if it was the moon of a second body, a larger body that collided with the Earth. And it just happened to be in the correct position to be incorporated into an orbit around the Earth post-collision.
Yeah.
That would be the only way of being able to capture it.
And our esteemed friend Jose Escamilla has done or made 2 fantastic documentaries about the moon, and one of them is about the Clementine mission and the pictures that were taken. So when we think of the moon these days, we think of it as well, gray, black and white, pretty much in the spectrum, right? But if you look at the original pictures of the moon, in fact, pictures of the moon in the 50s, and I guess, 50s mostly, because in the 60s it started to change. The moon doesn't look gray or grayscale. I mean, there's definitely coloration there. In fact, the Clementine pictures that Jose managed to download before they became unavailable show the moon in all kinds of colors, with amazing lights happening on, or light shows happening on the moon that we can't explain. Not to mention the structures that seem to exist on the moon. Also, the activity on the moon. There's one crater where we see a fairly large structure being built, and in fact, sort of, I guess, mine the crater wall. It's a massive structure, right? So there's a lot of stuff around the moon that is very strange. Go ahead.
I'm going to add to that. The only reason why NASA first suggested landing it on or in the Sea of Tranquility was that it was the standout place on the moon with the most objects visible from Earth for the last, I think it was 400 years of documenting odd anomalies on the moon.
No, look, that's exactly right.
You absolutely have to take that on board, that humans looking up at the moon had seen weird things, documented them, and that's why NASA went to that location. Now, wow, right?
Yeah, no, and again, we did go on for 6 shows about the moon. So we won't do that now. But it's important to understand this. We're nowhere near understanding what's actually going on with the moon. And in fact, within the solar system, the Earth-Moon relationship is unique. Okay, the size of the moon in relation to the size of the Earth is unprecedented.
And a normal.
Yeah. So Mars, which is probably the closest in size, even though it is a little smaller than the Earth, has got 2 moons, Phobos and Deimos, which are misshapen lumps of rock. One of which, I think, again, Phobos, may be hollow as well. But they're misshapen lumps of rocks. They're nowhere near as beautiful a moon as we have. And then you've got other larger bodies in the solar system which have a number of moons, but none of them have a relationship to their moons as we have to our moon. And don't forget either that our moon seemingly always shows us the same side. So we always look at the same face of the moon. Okay, it's to do with both the rotation of the moon and the Earth, and in relation, of the 2 bodies to each other, the same face is always shown to the Earth. So the dark side of the moon for the longest time was completely unknown to us, right? It's only the dark side because obviously when it's always away from us.
See it.
We can't see it, but it does get sunlight, so it's not like it's always in the dark. And the largest, the deepest craters in the solar system is also on the moon. I think it's the North Pole of the moon,
or the South, but I can't remember which one.
I can't remember which either. Yeah, but the largest or deepest crater. So there's a lot of things that are odd about. Is it possible the moon is hollow? Well, we know they are large. There have to be large cavities, and I mean significant cavities in the moon because it rang like a bell for an hour. Okay. So that would indicate that something is in there that allows for the reverberation of these. There would be shockwaves. Seismic
It would
shock
have to be hollow. It would have to
it
be
has to.
thin skin on the outside, like you make a bell.
Otherwise,
Yeah.
I mean, if you hit an iron ball, like a solid, even or any solid object, it goes boom, like it's like a dull sound. It doesn't. But if you hit anything hollow, metallic or otherwise, even a hollow timber ball or a metal ball or stone ball or anything, there's a melodic sound. It's like a bell, ding, right? And depending on how high the pitch is, but it certainly makes a very different sound. And that's what happened here. Now, that's all I want to say about the moon, because otherwise I'll just go on all night here.
So likewise.
But Dave, there were some expeditions planned, a la Jules Verne, weren't they, to the Hollow Earth?
Yeah, look, the most prominent of the modern day journeys was the proposed voyage to the Hollow Earth, which was set to take place in 2007. Clough and other theorists were certain of its success, and they even built an itinerary for their trip. The voyage cost around $20,000 to take part in and was supposed to take place in 2007 from June 26 to July 19. Setting off from Moscow on their third day, the first of 2 days for traveling and sightseeing. On the fourth day, they were to fly to Murmansk in Russia, where they would board a Russian icebreaker and make their way towards the North Pole. Once they arrived on the ninth day, they would spend 3 days, searching for the opening. It gets a little eccentric past this point. From here on out, they would travel up Hidekal River to the city of Jehu before taking a monorail trip to the city of Eden to visit the palace of the king of the inner world. After spending their time in Eden, they would make their trip home. If, God forbid, they didn't find the entrance, they did have a backup plan. Good for them. And this looks like a quote. It says, "Please note that if we are unable to find the polar opening, we will be returning via the New Siberian Islands to visit skeleton remains of exotic animals thought to originate from the inner Earth." Reads a note at the bottom of the itinerary. Sadly, the planning the expedition never worked out. One of their leaders, Steve Curry, died of brain cancer, explained Clough. The bad luck continued. According to Clough, another leader was killed after his plane flew into a mountain, and the third had to pull out because the largest investor in the company threatened to pull funding if the man didn't walk away from this hollow earth belief. The group has attempted a few more voyages, but the plans just keep unraveling. That said, Clough isn't opposed to another attempted voyage. They just need a leader. It couldn't be him, though, he said. He's an author, not an adventurer. That's very funny. There are people out there. There are tons of people who have expressed interest in the expedition if we can't get it off the ground, said Clough. I don't think there is a whole lot of people out there, certainly not in the millions, but maybe in the thousands.
Look, I'd be interested in an expedition. I would absolutely be interested. I'd like to go, I mean, not just to the North Pole, I'd like to go to the South Pole too.
I want to go to the South Pole.
Right? But I would like to go to the South Pole with air support. So I'd like I would like some Soviet era style gunships. I mean, these are heavy duty helicopters that can take bad weather and they can go distances. That's really the point you need. You need to have something that can take off vertically, land vertically, go through bad weather, can hover, right, and all these wonderful things. So that's what you really need. Maybe 3 or 4 of those bad boys. Maybe and look, you know what? If you look at Operation High Jump, right? that's what they brought. They brought a whole freaking flotilla, like a whole naval, armada. 4,000 ground troops. So if I had my way, that's the kind of expedition I would put together to the Antarctic. No, but think about it. I mean, the expense.
I already am. I know, right?
And they did. That's what they did. And then 8 years later, Operation Deep Freeze, of which we haven't heard as much as of Operation High Jump. But even those two expeditions, you won't hear much about. They're just not being publicized very much.
When we covered off High Jump, we were talking about two carrier groups, Group A and Group B.
Mm-hmm.
In these references that we've been talking about in this show cycle, they only mention one of the carrier groups.
Mm-hmm.
But you should reflect upon our Operation High Jump show where we deep dive into it. All right,
yeah.
just for FYI.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Now, look, that actually brings us to the conclusion of the Hollow Earth show cycle. Last time we did it in one show, I think. So this time we took two shows. But one thing we can say is that uncertainty remains about a Hollow Earth. Okay. While it is clear that massive caverns most certainly exist.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anybody would argue with that. Now, do I think the Earth is actually hollow? It's a tough call. My gut feel is probably not, because we do know that plate tectonics are a thing. We do know that the seismic activity and the associated magma, and then when it reaches the surface, lava flows are a real thing. So unless the stratification of the Earth, the layers and levels is a lot more complex than we thought it is. I think plate tectonics has it, and then clearly the lava, has to come from somewhere as well. So we can assume that large parts of the interior have, in fact, high temperatures to the point where they liquefy any solid material, be it rock or metal. As far as large cavities are concerned, I think that's a definite. Okay, I mean, there's no doubt in my mind there are massive cavities inside the Earth, big enough potentially to have living fossils, right? Living, maybe even remnants of ancient civilizations, potentially.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think there can be any doubt that we are not actively encouraging this kind of research. So the South Pole is closed for business, and the North Pole, which is not landmass, but it's literally water. It's the polar ocean, frozen for the most part, is inaccessible and not easy to work in. Right? I mean, you can't get there. It's hard to get there. You can fly over it, but to actually get there, that's a feat that was only accomplished about 100 years ago. Actually, sorry, I lied to you.
Nice.
About 80 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And even today, it'd be extremely difficult to get there. It'll be expensive, and it'll be a real hardship. South Pole, which would be easier because it is a continent, is off limits pretty much. Which is, again, we discussed this. If there's a buck to be made, why aren't they? Because, like I said, you could have fantastic ski or winter sports resorts in the Antarctic, open all year. Okay, it's just a hop, skip, and jump from the southern tip of Argentina or Australia, or in fact South Africa. It's very close. I mean, it's not very far from Argentina to the South Pole, or from Australia to the South Pole. Not really. I mean, it would be a fairly easy journey to make, more or less. But clearly, it's something that the people in charge don't want us to do. I mean, there's an Antarctic Treaty, which states that it's off limits for any nation, right? It doesn't stop it. I mean, people are still claiming ownership, obviously, right? And so does the US.
Yeah, but you've got to ask why those treaties in place.
Yeah, completely. Oh, it's to protect the large wilderness. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure. That's what it is. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm. Protect the penguins.
Yeah. That's just crazy to me. Mackie, what's the implications?
Well, look, there is an unknown quantity here, which we can't define unless we get more empirical evidence, right? I mean, okay, so you know what I think about empirical science, but this is a time when I really want more hard data. I want to have some facts. And the implications are, of course, that there may very well be ancient tech, potentially alien tech, potentially ancient alien tech. Not necessarily, but potentially, right? And this could be, because I believe that our Earth was part of a larger potentially galactic civilization at some point in the past. So what we will find is both terrestrial as well as extraterrestrial technology from one of the races that preceded us. Because if there's nothing, if there's one thing we've learned, nothing else, is that we are not the first race to inhabit this planet. That's what all the legends say. After the last deluge, a new race of us came along. Right? Be it cloned or otherwise, doesn't really matter. Before the deluge, before the catastrophe, and that's not just the Bible, by the way, that's everywhere. We lived a lot longer, right? We had a lot more tech, and then afterwards we lived a lot shorter and we had a lot less tech. So there's a lot in the ancient myths that talks about that specifically. So I should not be surprised to find more ancient sites. I mean, if you look at it from that point of view, none of the mysteries or none of the anomalies we find are as mysterious or anomalous as we think they are. If you subscribe to the traditional view that we are on a linear progression, meaning we started in the Stone Age and we made our way up from the Stone Age until today, and that's all there is to it, then, good for you, and then everything else is an anomaly. You can't explain it. It's tough to explain. And having said that, for the most part, that is actually true. If you looked at the Paleolithic and the Neolithic, so the Old Stone Age and the New Stone Age to now, that's sort of what happened, right? But that's only covering about 20,000 years. Okay,
that's right.
So what happened before that? So something, in my opinion, got us back to the Stone Age. So we were let's say we were bombed back to the Stone Age, right? Our civilization was destroyed, and there we are, got nothing. You've got to bang a few rocks together, just trying to survive. We know there are population bottleneck events, okay, mitochondrial leaf and Y chromosomal atom. We spent some time on those guys and girls. So we know there was a bottleneck about 100,000, about 80,000 years ago, 100,000 years ago, and again 80,000 years ago. We can trace the bottleneck that far back. So something happened, and we made our way back from nothing to where we are today. Now, human beings, we're pushing the time frame back further and further into the past, how long we've been on this planet, and I suspect that we will keep pushing it further and further back. What we're also doing, we are increasing our family tree. There are more and more Homo sapiens species that come along, not ancestor species, but contemporaries. People that we interbred with, therefore the same species. Otherwise, we couldn't interbreed with them. There's all Homo sapiens, right? And there's at least 5 or 6 known species of Homo sapiens. I believe we will find a lot more. So all of that means that we need to look at the past to understand the future. We're coming to another bottleneck event, quite possibly, and be it a Yellowstone or some other event, it doesn't really matter. And this is, again, part of the hypothesis, of course, that we need these ELEs, extinction level events, in order to keep us from ascending. Again, we believe that at the critical number, we will spontaneously ascend, because it's a critical mass thing. In nature, there's such a thing as critical mass. I'll give you an example. You get a certain amount of radioactive material, nothing happens. You add a bit more, nothing happens. You add a bit more, nothing happens. But you add that little bit more that breaks the camel's back, all of a sudden, you get a reaction. You get a nuclear reaction. Exactly, right? And that's called critical mass, right? And I believe that human beings, or the mind that we all represent, the Akashic record, you can call it, or the collective unconscious, as Jung called it. I don't really care what you call it, but we have it. And Edgar Cayce accessed it. And to me, Edgar Cayce is the best case study of the Akashic record. Anyway, the point is that collectively, I think, once we hit a certain number, and we think it might be around 7.76 billion, and then a few, based on the Fibonacci sequence, then we will spontaneously ascend. I don't know why or how. I just think that might be one of the laws of nature. It's just one of the things that happens, but it might not. But I'm just saying that's just one of the components of the hypothesis, not the cornerstone, but certainly one of the components to explain why we were constantly going through these extinction level events. When I say constantly, I'm saying every 20 to 100,000 years we're going through an extinction level event, the human race, or this human race, and maybe the human races before ours went through that as well, to bring us back to start again, right? I mean, why? What's the point? I mean, this is bigger than Ben-Hur, and in order to understand it all, I do urge you to read listen to the hypothesis and the epiphany as well. It's, I think show number 300. We had it again. Certainly 200, 100. If you want to see the genesis of the hypothesis, start with show 100, then show 200, and then show 300. You can see the genesis of the hypothesis there as well. And Dave just pinged me with the Toba catastrophe theory. Why don't you go ahead and talk a little bit about that?
In a minute and a half we have left,
yeah, that's
just
it.
I'll be concise. It was about 70,000 years ago where Toba erupted, and it was an extinction level event, as Becky had mentioned at the top of the show. This caused one of the bottleneck events in human DNA. That's what happened. I don't want to make light of it. I'm just saying it's as serious as you think. Say 75,000 years ago. And that was in Sumatra, near Indonesia, right?
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
That's the problem is, it doesn't matter. I mean, that's in the Northern Hemisphere. And the problem for us was it caused a volcanic winter. We're due for another, a massive eruption. And is it going to be Yellowstone? Yeah, it could be. Just to round this out from the top of the show to now, we've talked about Antarctica and a hollow Earth, but living on the surface is fraught with dangers. We could have a meteor impact. We could have the slumping of the side of Hawaii, which would devastate the South Pacific region. Think about that. It doesn't take very much. We hold on a thread. You take care. See everyone. See you next week for 323. Stay tuned for Jer Bear's Roundtable. Be part of it. Take care.